Good morning, everyone. I see that our Dix Park Conservancy is well represented today. We are going to start today with a work session. Kate, are you going to lead us?
Thank you, Mayor, and good morning to Council, City Attorney, and City Manager. My name is Kate Pierce with Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources, and I'm here today to provide an update on the Dix Park building and site analysis. I'll share a little bit about the origin of the study, some of the initial key findings, and then a summary of recommendations and next steps. As a reminder, this study was recommended as part of the implementation plan, which outlines the plans, studies, and projects needed to implement the master plan, which was adopted by Council in 2019. It includes an assessment of all the current conditions of the buildings and infrastructure on campus. It also includes an analysis of the potential for adaptive reuse of buildings to remain. It also includes an estimate of funding of future capital and operating costs, and then an analysis of ways to fund those costs. The timing of this study is also important as we think about implementation of the master plan. It provides the next level of detail regarding all the buildings and infrastructure, and also helps us prepare to take over the 80 structures and 118 acres of green space when the state vacates the campus. To be a good steward of the property, we also need to understand what that's going to cost the city in the future, understanding the state currently spends about $10.5 million annually on basic maintenance and operations, which would transfer to the city at time of full transfer. For the past 2 years, we've been working with a team of city staff and consultants, both locally and experts from around the nation. The team is led by MVVA, who was our consultant during the master plan, and we've been also working with the Development Finance Initiative out of the UNC School of Government, which has been helping us with our financial feasibility and financial planning work. In addition, we've been having regular conversations with the state on their status of relocation efforts and ongoing needs. One of the first things the team did was to get into every single building on the Dix campus and analyze the state of those buildings. And what we've discovered is pretty straightforward, that all of the buildings and utility systems on campus will require significant upgrade or replacement to meet current codes and standards. We also know that there are site-wide hazardous materials and site-wide accessibility issues that we will need to address. We're planning for interim solutions while we're also thinking about the longer term for those improvements that need to be planned, designed, and ultimately funded and constructed. In addition to the physical work, we've also been doing a market study in partnership with the Development Finance Initiative, and DFI interviewed a number of the adjacent developers who indicated that Dix Park is a key amenity and asset to their project, and that Dix Park is a unique asset nationally that will continue to attract interest from a variety of development partners to Raleigh. If we take a closer look at that market study, what we understand and what we're already seeing on the ground is that there are a number of high-density mixed-use developments either planned or already under construction on the Lake Wheeler Road corridor. The total tax-assessed value for these future developments is estimated to be greater than $1.3 billion, with an estimated over 3,500 new residential units just along Lake Wheeler Road. All of these findings help inform a series of recommendations related to building demolition, adaptive reuse, phasing, and future strategies. One thing I want to point out is that most of these are only feasible once DHHS leaves the campus, but we have identified a series of early implementation efforts that maintain project momentum that we will need to continue to work with the state on to meet both the city and the state's operational goals. So one of these is around demolition. The overall demolition strategy calls for the removal of nearly 670,000 square feet of building space, which not only reduces the amount of impermeable surface in the park by about 50%, but also adds significant green space to the park landscape. This can only occur when DHHS vacates the campus, so what we are suggesting is that we continue to abate and demolish smaller structures consistent with the recommendations of the master plan. Now, there was some community conversation on whether or not these cottages could be used as affordable housing. But after running the numbers and talking to local affordable housing developers, we learned that the cost to abate and renovate these structures would be about 3 to 4 times the cost of building a new affordable unit elsewhere. So we recommend continuing with the idea of the removal of these cottages. For all of the buildings that are to remain, which would be about a little over 500,000 square feet, we want to work with council to basically answer the question, what should the future uses in the park could be, and what are the partners needed to manifest those future uses? The master plan suggests that a variety of uses would benefit the park and the community. And this may include cultural institutions, city offices, nonprofits, and hospitality that could provide revenue to go back and to support the park. Working with council, we want to develop a process and a set of criteria that is transparent and open to ensure that the uses that land in the future of the park provide not only park benefit, but public benefit and are consistent with the vision outlined in the master plan. And we also realize that we need development partners who can not only fund the costs of upfit and ongoing operations, but that there is a potential for those proceeds from market leases to be invested back into the park. This will take time to develop, and obviously is also dependent on the state leaving the campus. So in the interim, we have identified 2 buildings, the Lineberger and Brown building, that would support current and short-term park operations. Lineberger, which is building number 1 seen on the map, is identified as a future park headquarters and potentially could provide temporary swing space for city departments. And then the Brown building, which is number 2 on the map, could support operations of Gibson Play Plaza with additional restrooms, concessions, and office space. There is partial funding in the 2020 Parks Bond to support both of these projects. And when we come back to your council meeting in November, we will ask for your direction to move on design of these. We've also had some very early conversations with the state about these buildings to ensure that everything we're doing is not only beneficial to the city's operational concerns, but doesn't impact the state's daily operations. In parallel to the building and site analysis, there's been a lot of work with the Conservancy on developing a concession strategy for the park. Where are those 1 million visitors that are coming to Gibson Play Plaza going to get an ice cream cone, a bottle of water, a snack? So the Conservancy has hired real food consultants to develop a food and beverage identity based on the principles of the master plan. So the idea of offering something for everyone, that there are price points that everybody, regardless of their budgetability, can afford to get something in the park. That the concessions embrace the local community and park's identity, and the Conservancy has already been having interviews with local vendors and expects to issue an RFP to go through a process to select either one or multiple vendors to provide concessions in the park. To realize this, the city will need to work to develop an overarching concessions agreement, which looks at targeting 2 main opportunities, the Gibson Play Plaza and the Flower Cottage. Both of these buildings would be leased. In the case of the Flower Cottage, we would amend the lease, but both of these buildings would be leased to the Dix Park Conservancy, and then the Conservancy would operate with a third-party vendor to provide concessions in the park. When we think about concessions and other funding options to support the park, it's really interesting that if you look across the nation, all parks have different funding strategies. Today, we are primarily funded by public funding and donations. We earn a little bit of income from rentals and events, but in order to start to move towards sustainability, we need to consider other types of funding agreements and funding tools. And one of these is a municipal service districts. The idea of the municipal service district is that the city and partners are investing a lot in both the park and the transportation infrastructure, and that the properties closest to the park will benefit from this increased level of service and amenity. DFI analyzed existing tax conditions and future tax conditions based on the anticipated development program, and then looked at multiple scenarios at what a potential MSD adjacent to Dix Park could provide. When we think about these scenarios, there are a lot of policy considerations that staff will look to council for direction. For example, in this first scenario, DFI modeled what would be the projected change in annual tax revenue with just the developments that are either under construction now or proposed. What you see here is that this largely avoids single-family residential impacts, and that would be one of those policy considerations that we would seek from council as staff starts to initiate a formal feasibility study. But if an MSD were placed on the properties highlighted in orange, and those were developed at their full capacity, that MSD could produce $1.8 million that could then go back into supporting park operations. But that policy consideration about avoiding single-family impacts is consistent through all of these scenarios. The second scenario looks at the amount of state-owned property adjacent to Dix Park. Now, we know that we can't tax state-owned property, but what the city can do is tax the improvement, the private improvement on the state-owned property. So if Centennial East were to develop with private development, there would be potential tax revenue available from that, and if an MSD were placed over that, there could be potentially $3.3 million generated that could then go back into supporting park operations. Again, here you see the avoidance of impacts to single-family residential. The third and least likely scenario is looking at all of the property in the study area and what would that generate in terms of a MSD and future tax revenue. This includes all of downtown South, all of the state-owned property, the properties adjacent to Lake Wheeler Road, and if the city were to create a boundary that included all of this study area, a potentially $5.7 million tax benefit or tax revenue could come back in terms of an MSD. Now, with this, one of the policy considerations is the further you get away from the park, the less services are provided. So what staff would recommend is actually a narrower boundary similar to scenario 1 or 2. So when looking at future municipal service districts, staff will come back to your November council meeting and ask for your direction to initiate a formal feasibility study, and would also ask for any early policy considerations about avoiding single-family residential property impacts, understanding that tax is only applicable to portions of state-owned property with private development. We know additional outreach and engagement will be needed, and that when we think about a boundary, the further away from the park, the less services will be provided. So should a boundary be closer to the park? So that was a lot of different topics on a lot of different initiatives, and all of this is coming back to you at your November 21st council meeting. But what we will seek are authorization for a number of things. One is authorization to continue with the next round of demolition for those small cottages. The second is authorization to develop a process to evaluate and solicit a range of operating partners to support a diversity of uses that benefit the park. We will also seek your authorization to formally request release of the Brown and Lineberger buildings for adaptive reuse and to enter into agreements with DHHS to begin the design of those buildings. And finally, we will look to you for authorization to negotiate the concessions agreement with the Dix Park Conservancy and the associated leases. We will also look to council for direction to authorize staff to initiate a formal MSD feasibility study, which is required under state statute. So as I mentioned, lots of different topics, all coming back to you at your November 21st meeting. And in addition, with those recommendations at your November meeting, all of the agreements, contracts, and findings from what you authorize would obviously come back to council for review and approval. We also know there's a lot of interest from this table and others for future discussions around project phasing, affordable housing, and development in the park, and we'll respond to council as appropriate. So I'm going to stop there. It's a lot of information on a lot of different topics, but opening it up for questions and discussion.
Councilmember Harrison.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kate, for the presentation. It's obvious the amount of work that's gone on into this before coming here. So I just want to thank everyone at Raleigh Parks, staff, conservancy members, and then our leadership committee, some of our folks here on council that serve in that capacity. So just to note a couple of items. 80 structures, 118 acres, $10.5 million of annual expenses, just if we don't do anything new.
Correct.
I really appreciate the focus on a transparent, open process around reuse and what this looks like. I think that will be critical for community support. And then I also do want to mention the MSD opportunity. I just want to emphasize the need for significant community engagement on that. I appreciate the idea of avoiding single-family homes. I also want to make sure that we are truly considering low-income residents that could be impacted, as well as our partners around, NC State, state partners. And Kate, I don't know if you could speak to this or someone could speak to how long do MSDs, or at least in our history in the city, take to become operational? My understanding is this is really the very beginning of a process.
Right, and I potentially will look to some of my colleagues in the audience. I think if you look at the history of the Downtown Raleigh Alliance and the Blue Ridge or in the Hillsborough Street Corridor, those were years in the making. I know that Blue Ridge Corridor Alliance is also considering an MSD, which potentially started the conversations around that 5 to 6 years ago. So these are long time in the making, but I think what we have here is we've already done a lot of the feasibility work to get us to a point where we have the information that we then need to do the community outreach and engagement work to parallel that technical analysis. And so I think one of the ideas and goals is at what point in the parks development timeline do we need some of those additional revenues to help support those operating costs, and lining up the process of developing the MSD, the feasibility study, to meet some of those operational funding goals.
So I think Kate did a good job answering that. Tansy Hayward, Deputy City Manager. The only things that I would add is on November 21st, you will have the Blue Ridge Corridor Alliance is anticipated to come and make some recommendations related to the MSD work they've been doing. We can certainly include in that the historical information about the process they went through, and we can also share at that time projected next steps and timeline. As Kate indicated, there are some mandated timelines and steps under state law, but certainly some of the community engagement work that we'd be recommending would be in beyond that is required in state law. So we can make sure that you get sort of a historical context, certainly of the Blue Ridge work, and then project forward what next steps could look like for this.
That'd be great. Thank you both.
Any additional questions, Councilmember Fort?
This is a trick question.
Uh-oh. We gave away the secret.
Kate missed it. I said, this is a trick question. But I'm going to look at Marshall when I'm asking you the question, or the city manager, I should say. Have we engaged in any conversations with the county about maybe helping chip in for some funding opportunities?
That is an interesting question, Councilmember Fort.
She said it was a trick question.
Yes. So no would be the answer at this point. Obviously, we've been doing a lot of analysis and assessment to kind of figure out what our next steps might look like. And as we begin to build out and kind of phase out what that plan would look like, we would obviously lean on our partners. I do know that they have partnered with the Conservancy in a small capacity. I say small, right? But there are greater opportunities for the county to be a partner with us in this work as well, I would assume.
Yeah, and the project that the city manager is referring to is the county did provide a $1 million grant through their ARPA funding for accessibility improvements at the park, which are underway in terms of design and hopefully will be under construction in 2024.
Thank you, Councilmember Jones.
Thank you so much. I want to have just a brief discussion about MSDs and how the city, so there's some education that I would like on how those processes start, because there's the Blue Ridge, there's DRA, there's all this and that, but those are separate entities. The city initiates the MSD because it's a city tax, and then they have the option to partner with these other organizations. So as we look at what we have, and aside from downtown, because I mean, I love the DRA and what they do with social services and cleanups and all of that. You have Hillsborough, possible Blue Ridge corridor, possible Midtown. That's another discussion. And when we look at and we pinpoint those possible MSDs, I'm wondering, what are the metrics that the city provides or that the city has? That what about New Bern? What about Capitol Boulevard? If it's a city-initiated thing to begin with, how are we investing in areas that are underserved? Because it doesn't, with the MSDs that we currently have, I don't see that, the underserved community being addressed in all of these benefits. Because if we're pinpointing Blue Ridge and we're pinpointing Hillsborough Street as areas for investment and to make that, then what are we doing for our underserved communities as well? So I guess the watered down question is what metrics do we decide as a city are worthy of an MSD? And how can we make sure that that's distributed equitably throughout the city?
Yeah, that's a great question that I probably don't have all the answers for today. But I think if you look at the location of the MSDs currently in the city, and you look at potentially where areas of growth will be in the city and where areas of development may come in, that might be one of those ways to establish metrics that could then help inform potential future locations.
Right, and I immediately think of the BRT. You know, we're looking at New Bern, Capitol. Those are areas that we're going to have big investment in. So how are we as a city, if we're doing this and we're looking at this for Dix Park, how are we also looking at our other areas of growth and opportunity that we've already established and also growing them as well?
Madam, if I may. For me, I think the key is for MSDs is what additional services are we adding on top of the services the city's providing? So if we're going to look at other areas and we're asking the businesses to take an additional tax, I think that's key. You know, when I think about some of the businesses in some of these other communities, right now some of them are trying to survive. So I think we have to ask ourselves, what additional tax are we looking to put on the businesses to move the project forward on top of services that we're offering? I think the key is making sure the services we're supposed to offer at base we do and excel in that, and then ask what additional services are we looking to provide in order to say we want to put an MSD on top of these businesses.
Councilmember Black.
Hi. Thanks for the update. I know this is conversations around this park that has been happening since I was in elementary school, literally. So I think I mentioned it before, but one of the things that I'm curious is our role in like asking for, incorporating, or just like hearing the thoughts that we have. And one of the things I wanted to talk about was market spaces in Dix Park. I would really love to see that. I think it would really be a really great way to activate the space and bring different types of people into the park from all over the city. So I'm gonna talk about it again when y'all bring it up in November, and I'm gonna bring it up now. But one of the things that I'm curious about specifically is the affordable housing. And I know you guys are bringing this back next month. You said you would. So are there any plans or any ideas for affordable housing development in the park? I feel very strongly like if we can't do the cottages, given the history of the park tied to both indigenous communities and American chattel slavery, I think there needs to be some form of affordable housing within the park, around the park. And I'm just wondering, like, is there a plan for that if that's not going to be happening with the cottages?
Yeah, so what we have done is looked at basically at a very high level, where could affordability happen in the park? And one of the ideas is that along Lake Wheeler Road, where you're seeing a lot of the high density mixed use development already happening, does it make sense that across the street on the park property, there could also be development, some of which could be affordable? So we have not brought that to council's table, but we'll look for council's direction to bring back those scenarios and some of those thoughts and ideas, understanding that a lot of that can't happen until DHHS vacates the campus, but we have already initiated the study.
So it's going to be like a kind of a phase. It's not something that we may really talk in detail next month, but maybe like as the process is flowing.
Yeah, we can work with the city manager's office on figuring out when to bring the discussions around affordable and new development back to the council table, but we have already started that work.
Okay, awesome. Thanks.
Do you want to speak, Councilmember Patton?
Yeah, sure do. Thanks. Hi, thanks for all your work on this. I just wanted to chime in and put exclamation marks on the things that were really meaningful. Work sessions are our chance to tell you our values to drive your work. And so I want to put a star on front-loading the affordable housing component. I think that's really critical. Obviously, my colleagues have said it, but I just want to put a real fine point on that, having that come earlier than later in the process. I also really want to put an exclamation mark on being really sensitive to the single-family homes in the MSD area. We studied that area. We know it's a soft target for gentrification, and I don't want us to do anything that would amplify that. So that's important to me. And then the last piece I wanted to offer, and I hope I won't come across as a sad trombone as I frame this out. I think this is going to be a real gemstone of our city. And also, as I represent District B, it's I know a lot of my constituents feel like they need to get up their passport to go to Dix Park. It just feels a really long way away. And so as we think about things like hospitality and other things like that, I would really I hope we can keep present and front of mind, making sure this is a park for our city residents too, and if we can prioritize or find creative ways to get people who live in the hinterlands, as Councilmember Harrison calls them, to the park. Things like circulator buses when there's big events, from circulator bus from Triangle Town Center over to the park, or something like that. If we can just be really thoughtful about the hospitality uses and making sure they're oriented around making sure all our city residents feel welcome at the park. Yep.
Any other questions?
One thing I forgot to note, but will also remind you in your November meeting, is all of this work has been reviewed and vetted both at the Community Committee and Leadership Committee table, and is now coming to council as part of our park governance process. So I'll remind everyone of that when we meet again in November. And if there's any information that you'd like in between now and November, please don't hesitate to reach out. I know some people have also indicated interest in doing a park building tour, which we would obviously love to offer to all of council when it's convenient, because that you really start to understand the structures and what is the potential for their adaptive reuse. So I'll offer that to council as well at your convenience. But look forward to coming back in November and sharing those formal recommendations for your review and discussion.
Okay. Since the Conservancy is here, Orange, do you want to, I normally don't do this during a work session, but you are here and I know you're a partner. Do you have anything you'd like to add?
You're giving me a chance to talk at the mic.
I'm scared, but yes.
Thank you, Mayor. Orge Quarles, Raleigh resident, chairman of the Dix Park Conservancy. First of all, thank you, council, for having this session. Of course, this is something we've wanted for a while, and I want to thank Kate and her team for all of their hard work, and of course, my Conservancy board members. There are a couple of other items that probably need further discussion, and this is probably not the venue, but we all know that the bond that we use to purchase the park will have its completion in 2025, and we would like to know, excuse me, what the council is considering in terms of using that bond revenue, and we hope that it will be used to go towards the park. What we haven't talked a lot about, it's still parking. Parking is still a major issue, and I know the affordable housing is really important to the council, but we need to really address the parking issue. When you're going to bring in an additional million and a half people, you better be prepared to deal with that. So I hope that that gets more conversation and discussion. And let me turn to my board. Is there anything else since I have the floor? We do appreciate that. Thank you, Mayor.
When you mentioned parking, I had to look around to see if Jim Goodman was here.
His ears are burning.
Yes, okay. Thank you.
Anything else? Okay.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, with that, I will adjourn the work session, and we will be back at 1 o'clock. Thank you.